So the first type of techniques we're going to see when working with asynchronous JavaScript is callbacks. Callbacks are a bit old, but it's very important to understand them. Most of the examples explaining asynchronous JavaScripts will be reading files from disks. And reading files from disks is done asynchronously in the node file system. Here we are talking about the built-in file system, which is node file system. It works asynchronously, which is perfect for these examples. So you cannot run the code here in the same way you do with synchronous file reads. To use node file system, just read or use const fs require fs. No need to install anything. We are going to use only asynchronous calls in the file systems. So what are callbacks? The callback is a function, and that function is used as a parameter for another function. So you are telling the other function, when you finish, call back this function. Because we don't know when it's going to finish. It's not run in synchronous way. It might take few seconds or less, and we don't want it to block other codes from being executed. So we provide a function to call back when the function finishes. So the callback is a function that is usually passed as a parameter to another function. Typically, we're going to use callbacks when we read data from databases, downloading a file, making web API requests, and any similar task. So the callback functions allow the functions to run in the background, and you need to know that they are called only when the function finishes its work. And most importantly, they are non-blocking. Let's see the first example. Here, in this example, we are going to read a file from the disk. We are using fs, read file function. This function is asynchronous. So we need to provide a callback function telling the read file that when you finish, please call back this function with the data. This is the callback function here. So the callback function name is callback. The function is here. So we are telling the fs read file, when you finish, call back this function. So let us see the simplest form of the callback function. Callback function, two parameters. First one is error, second one is data. Of course, you can have your own names here. Error will be true if there was a problem while reading the file. Otherwise, data will be true and error will be null. So, in a typical situation, this function, read file, will go and start reading the disk, and other code will continue to be executed. And when it finishes, it will call back this function with either error or the data. So we expect this time no error. So constant students JSON.parse data, and we log the students. So the new thing, or the main difference between synchronous and asynchronous file read when using callbacks is you need to provide a function. And that function will be called when your file read finishes. All other code can still be running since the asynchronous function is a non-blocking one. Let's see the next example here. Here we are using error also. We are checking for error. Again, we are reading a file. This file does not exist. And we are providing a callback function. So read file will go and start reading. It will encounter an error. It will call back the callback function, this time with an error. And there will be no data. How we know that? Very simple. If error. So if error is not null, so there has been a problem. If error, then we print the error. Otherwise, let us say the file is an existing file and there will be no error, then it will send data and this error will be false and it will come here, convert the data to the JSON format and print the data. This is a typical callback function that is called by any asynchronous function. The callback function is provided as a parameter to the asynchronous function. Let's see the example in code. This is our function. Let file read equals to, this is the file name. I just changed the directory name. And this is our callback function. This file will be read. When it finishes, it will send the data to this function. Let me run this. So here we see the data. If we need to take care of errors, then we need to say here, if error, okay, then you can do console, for example, do log error, or you can do any other, okay, any other function. Else we need to print the data. So if I change the file name, this file does not exist now. So the callback function will be called with an error. Let me run. So this is the error. It was caught here in the callback function because the error was not null and there will be no data to print. The professional way of writing callbacks is as anonymous function. Is not usually written as a separate function here, but for simplicity, I started the explanation as a separate function. Let me show you the code as an anonymous function. This is the code, how you write a callback usually as an anonymous function. Actually, this is the same callback function you saw in the previous example. Copy and paste here. Of course, no name, okay? It will be an anonymous function. So now the fsread will use this anonymous inline function, if you want, as its own callback. So if there is an error, it will call it with this error here. If there is data, it will call it with data. How to make it anonymous? Very simple. We will use the same code. How to convert a separate function into an anonymous function in callbacks? Just copy this. Copy the entire function here. That's it. So now this is the callback function. It's an anonymous one in the anonymous parameter function in the call of the asynchronous function. I can run this now. Same code. Let me just make sure the file name is fine. Okay, this is the right file name. Run. We get the data. If there is an error, as usual, the error will be true and it will give us the error. Okay, we see the error here. So typically, callback functions are just parameters sent to asynchronous functions with either error or data. So how we use the callbacks if you are calling it from another function? In this example, I am calling a function with getStudent with a student ID. This is the function. I'm providing the student ID and the callback to that function. So when the getStudent function finishes, it will send either the error or the data here. Now, how it will send it? Okay, let's see the details. When you call the function getStudent, you are providing student ID and callback. You are telling the getStudent function that this is your callback. When you finish, send the results here. Type inside the function, you have file read. Okay, this file read is another asynchronous function. This is a different one. It needs its own callback. So fs file read has its own callback. See, this is the fs read here. If there is no error, data will come here. If there is an error, see what happens if there is an error. CB error. What is CB? CB is the callback function you provided. So where is the callback function? This is the callback function. So it will be called with an error. If there is no error, you convert the data, you filter it or find the student. We only need one student, not all students. We use find. Then we get the student. How to send the data back to our get function? Callback null student. Null means what? No error. And this is the data. So you will call back with the data. So inside the calling function, you either get an error or data. Sometimes you have multiple callbacks. No difference when you have multiple callbacks. First function, this is the one we just saw. Another function to get a course, one course only. You call the get course function with the course ID 107 in this example and the callback function. This is the callback function. So for get course, the callback is this one. For get student, the callback is this one. So when the get student finishes, it sends a callback here. Same thing here, it will read the file. Read file is a synchronous function. It needs its own callback. If it finishes, it will send the data or the error back here. Of course, it will filter the data to find one course and then call back null course. No error, and this is the data. If there is an error, it will send the error to the function. So it uses the function name in the definition, callback. Of course, you can use any name here, but the called function knows where its callback function now. So if we run this code, we don't know which one is gonna finish first. It depends on how long the task is, because both functions are running asynchronously. Let me show you this code. This is the code here. This is the first function, get student. The second function, get course. We will call get student. This is get student. This is the callback of get student. This is the callback of get course. Inside get student, when you read a file, file read of a file system needs its own callback. This is the callback. If there is no problem, it will use CB callback with null and students. So this is what will be sent to this callback function. Same thing for the second one. You send a callback function and a course ID. If it finishes, it either calls with data or error. If it calls with CB null and some data, then everything was fine and sending back the data. Calling multiple callback functions is still manageable, but things become very complicated when you call nested callback functions. We run into a problem, very well-known problem, called Callback Hell. This problem happens when you have series of callbacks and each function calls another function with its own callback. So when the number of callbacks increase, the problem becomes very difficult, and this is what we call callback hell. Let me show you this example. In this example, we are trying to read one student data. We did this already. However, we want also, with the student data, we want the program name he is enrolled in. The program name is not available in the same file. It's available in another file. The file name is CNG programs. And we need the getStudent function after fetching the student data from the student JSON file, to also go and find the program name. So now this function again will call another function, which is get program name or get program. Here, get program, we need the name of the program, and it's providing also a callback function to the second program. Here, the get student is telling the get program, when you finish, either send us an error or the program name. So now this function will be waiting on data from this function to be called back. Again, the second function, get program, will open a file using asynchronous read. When it reads the file, it provides a callback function for the file read. Let us say it got the data. It filtered the data with the program name. Then it uses CB callback with the program name. It will call its callback. Its callback is this. Let us say it called it back. Then the get student function now, since all the data is ready, it will call back its callback function, which is this one. So now we made 4 callbacks only to read data from 2 files. In the next example, things become very complicated. We are reading the same thing, student ID. We want the program name here. We also want the course names. The course names are available in a third file. The file name is course. So this second function, get student, see, first it will read the file with its own callback for file read. Then it will call the get program, providing its own callback for the get program, which will read the file, providing its own callback for the file read. Once finishing getting the program data, it will call back its callback function here. Also, we need to get the get course names. Get course names also provide the get course name with a callback. When the get course names finishes reading the file, it will call back its callback function. Finally, when all the data is ready, data from the programs file and the course file and the student file ready, then the get student here now will call back its callback function, which is this one here, the callback function here. Here we made 6 callbacks to get only the student course names and the program name from 3 files. If you are doing a professional work and you are reading data from so many files and waiting for network reads, you will run definitely into what we call callback hell. The problem becomes unmanageable when you read data from so many files and you have so many callback functions. Callbacks were followed by promises. Promises solved 50% of the complexity of callbacks. We'll see promises in the next tutorial.